The Federal Reserve Bank manages the nation's money supply, buying and selling government bonds, adjusting interest rates. The Fed stimulates the economy by lowering interest rates to make money cheaper and borrowing and thus spending easier. It slows the economy by making money more expensive and borrowing harder by raising interest rates. Occasionally, the Fed chairman, for many years Alan Greenspan, emerges from his temple and makes somewhat cryptic pronouncements about where he and his crew are trying to steer the economy.
For if the tentative indications that the contraction phase of this business cycle is drawing to a close are ultimately confirmed, we will have experienced a significantly milder downturn than the long history of business cycles would have led us to expect.
Now, if you don't fully get this, you're hardly alone. But the basic problem is simple: how to steer a course between inflation and recession.
He reminds me of a famous passage in the Odyssey that describes Ulysses trying to negotiate a passage between two rocks, two great dangerous rocks.
In the Odyssey, one of these rocks harbored Scylla, a six-headed monster who liked to eat passing sailors. In our epic, Scylla represents the dangers of inflation. And beneath the other rock lay Charybdis, a ship-sucking whirlpool. For us, it's the downward spiral of recession. We were at sea a number of years ago with two Nobel Prize-winning economists, the late Franco Modigliani, seated, and Bob Solow, who took a day from their vacation in ritzy Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, to explain the analogy between Ulysses' passage through Scylla and Charybdis and the Federal Reserve Chair's job at the helm of the economy.
And so he's trying to steer a course somewhere between those two things without coming between Scylla and Charybdis, if you like it, without coming too close to either, and certainly without getting all the way into the whirlpool or into the sea monster.
Like Ulysses, the Fed is forever navigating treacherous waters. In recent decades, the greater fear has been Scylla, the monster of inflation, because inflation robs innocent victims of their wealth, threatens to devour them and the economy as a whole.
There are many, many costs that society faces when there is inflation.
When inflation was high, people like our local charter captain, for example, found that if they wanted to buy a boat, they would face the impossibly high interest payments that inflation brought. Those who wanted to buy a house on shore faced double-digit mortgage rates. And retirees on fixed pensions had to give up their dream of retiring to resorts like Martha's Vineyard. Inflation turned around their expectations, reduced the value of their income, and sent them home on the afternoon ferry.
So there are really great costs, and the worst part is that once you get into inflation, to get out of it is very costly. If people take the view that inflation doesn't matter, then there is no end to inflation, because unless we make an effort, inflation does not stop by itself.
But you see countries around the world, you read in the papers, 1,000% inflation in a year and so forth. Those countries still function, don't they?
Oh, are they unhappy? You should be there. And you will hear how people waste their time in all kinds of operations which are due only to inflation. Spending quickly, investing, never having a penny in your pocket because it loses value.
Does the country know that?
Some years ago, Professor Jeffrey Sachs saw the misery of inflation firsthand in the South American country of Bolivia, several of whose politicians had taken a course with Sachs at Harvard.
That's really a relief, because there was one pretty bad week 2 weeks back.
When Sachs was hired, Bolivia was in turmoil, due largely to rampant inflation.
Prices were doubling almost every month, and there were huge stacks of currency to make any transaction. The first thing I saw when I arrived in La Paz was an old man counting out 30,000 pesos to buy a piece of chewing gum.
In the 1980s, Bolivia's annual inflation rate reached 50,000%, one of the highest in recorded history. To an economist, The reason was obvious.
It's writ large everywhere you turn around that it's money printing which drives the prices. There's nothing subtle about it. So one tries to devise policies that can help them in a short term get away from the need to print money.
So first, Sachs stopped the currency presses. He then advised the government to curb its deficit spending on money-losing government-run tin mines, for example. But tight economic policies like these create their own problem. The tin miners took to the streets to protest the fact that they were about to be unemployed. Back in the U.S., when the Federal Reserve fears that the Scylla of inflation is about to rear its ugly heads here, it comes about, clamps down on the money supply, and sets sail in the direction of a slower economy. But then the danger is that we will get sucked into the Charybdis of recession.
If you go too far, if you steer too hard in that direction, then you get forces which begin to pull the economy down. That's the Charybdis whirlpool. A little bit of recession creates a little pressure for more recession. My business is bad. I buy fewer materials. I lay off workers. They can't spend incomes they don't have. My suppliers find that they're losing money, and that can accumulate too.
In short, if a country's central bank, like the Fed, comes down too hard on inflation, it can slow the economy in ways that could make it hard to revive. That's what happened in Bolivia, which has barely grown at all in the years since Jeffrey Sachs helped whip inflation there. A similar pattern repeated itself in Indonesia, in Argentina, and, though less drastically, has throughout the history of the United States. And if you think inflation makes people unhappy, just look at unemployment.
It's typical to have higher rates of stress-related diseases like cardiovascular problems, heart attacks, high blood pressure, ulcers, alcoholism, cirrhosis of the liver. All those have been shown in higher incidence among chronically unemployed, dislocated workers.
A sailor tries to steer a middle course by keeping an eye on which way the wind is blowing, watching for dangerous cross currents, scanning the sky for storm clouds ahead. So too, the Fed chairman on his odyssey consults a variety of economic data and trends.
The complex nature of the economy and the chance of false signals demand that we cast our net broadly, gathering information on prices, real activity, financial and foreign exchange markets, and related data.
As our economists point out, even after years of low inflation, we ignore it at our peril. So too recession.
You have to worry about both of them. The big mistake is to concentrate on only one thing. Of course, there are extreme times in the bottom of a deep recession. You don't worry about inflation. If you were all the way over on the Scylla side, you'd have eyes only for Charybdis and vice versa. It's when you're going down the middle that you have to keep looking one side or the other.
And so that's what we're always hoping, that the Fed can guide us safely through these dire straits to the land of low inflation and continued growth with no recession in sight.